All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is what I'm actually really passionate about. I started doing Enneagram work a little bit over a decade ago, and like Drew said, it has, changed my view of myself, my marriage. It's been extremely useful. If you know me, I'm one of those people who are just obsessed with every kind of personality assessment. So MBTI, StrengthsFinders, DISC, everything, But the Enneagram is by far my favorite, and you'll hear a little bit why. Just real quick, can I get a show of hands? How many of you are familiar with the Enneagram? Okay, a good number of you. Okay, how many of you have done work in the Enneagram? Okay, good. Okay, great. How many of you think you know what type you are? All right, great. It's good. So I was given the impossible task of having to give you an overview of the Enneagram by noon today. So just to a few things before we get started here, because I'm going to jump right in. When we do this, so we now teach an Enneagram course at our church, and it's a 4-week, pretty intensive course, and where we go through, week 1 is basically like a theological frame for the Enneagram, because we want people to know, like, we actually care about the Bible, and we're not just, teaching this other thing. And then basically we go through each of the triads. So if you know the Enneagram, you know the triad. You have the gut triad, which is type 8, 9, 1. We do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we start with 8 because, as you'll see in a little bit, type 8s generally are the types that if we don't start with their number, they won't come back. So, couple disclaimers to make here. A lot of the things I'm going to say, I'm not going to have the time to nuance them. So sometimes it's going to feel almost like a caricature, which I absolutely don't like doing when it comes to the Enneagram. I'm going to use maybe a lot of generalizations, and it might feel like, oh, that isn't exactly me. Bear with me. I'm going to try my best to nuance as best as I can, but just so you know, that's where it is. But again, I love teaching this course. It's always really a course that's super well attended at our church. I always say that if people at our church were as engaged with the sermons as they are with the course, we'd have a church full of Bible scholars, okay? So kind of overview of what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of a quick, some broad strokes of what is the Enneagram, why it matters for faith, and then we're going to just do a quick cursory overview of the 9 types. Okay, so hopefully if you're not sure what your type is, my hope is that by the end you'll at least start to have a better idea of what your type might be, and maybe the types of your loved ones, which in general you should not type other people, but we do anyways, okay? Goal for today's session really is not for you to walk away being like, I hate my number, or why am I like this? Really is a deeper gratitude for who you are, a deeper compassion for yourself and others. One of the things doing this Enneagram work is so many of the things about myself I didn't like, and so many of the things that, when with conflict with my wife, where I was like, why are you this way? After doing Enneagram work, I was like, oh, there's not something deficient with me or you. We're just wired completely differently, right? And then lastly, a deeper curiosity to keep learning. So hopefully this will kind of whet the appetite a little bit for you to maybe do a little bit of your own work. Let's start with, what is the Enneagram? The Enneagram really is like, some people see it as personalities. I like to say they're like 9 distinct archetypes. So 9 strategies human beings use to navigate survival, safety, and belonging. And so, its origins are very hotly contested. Some people think this is, you find traces of this that were passed down orally in a lot of mystic traditions. Some people believe this originated in ancient Egypt. You even find traces of it in Buddhism in Korea. All that to say, Richard Rohr was probably the first person to kind of frame the Enneagram from a Christian perspective. And the person I learned from, Suzanne Stabile, actually learned from Richard Rohr. So just so you know, that is kind of the framework we're going to be using today. And the idea, even whether you're Christian or not, the Enneagram, it kind of touches on the core human impulse toward safety, love, belonging, purpose, right? And it basically is giving you 9 ways that we as human beings seek those things in life, okay? What I love about the Enneagram in particular is that it's one of the few assessments that is primarily about motivation, not behavior. And so why I personally think it's a little bit more powerful than something like the Myers-Briggs, which I love as well. It's like the Myers-Briggs will test, are you extroverted or introverted? But the Enneagram will tell you that 9 people can be extroverted for all different reasons, right? And it's a really powerful tool. Or you can be organized because you want to please people, or you can be organized because you like to see the world in an organized way, right? Two very different things. So that's one thing that's really powerful about the Enneagram. Also, I think the Enneagram is one of the most dynamic assessments where, a lot of times with other personality assessments, you'll look at someone and immediately be like, okay, you're extroverted, you're intuitive, you're definitely a J, things like that, definitely a feeler, But with the Enneagram, it's so dynamic, and we're going to get into this a little bit because you have wings, you have security, stress types, paths of integration, disintegration. There's all this movement. So at any one moment, 2 people who are the same type can look completely different. It's very actually, there are, of course, some caricatures there, but it's really hard to put people in a box, okay? And then finally, it names both gift and struggle. So, part of the beauty of Enneagram work is that there is an aspect of it where you're really embracing the gift of who you are, but you're also kind of embracing some of the blind spots that come with those gifts. I'm going to preach on this tomorrow at Hope, but, there's, true self, shadow self, new self, old self, true self, false self, this language of, there's always a shadow to the gift, right? The thing that is probably your best trait can also be a part of something that you struggle with or the people around you struggle with as well. And so the Enneagram kind of gives us language for that. For today, at times, it's going to feel like I'm erring more on the blind spot struggle, partly because as I've taught this course, I realize that especially when it comes to figuring out what number you are, people for some reason resonate far more with their flaws than they do, with the things that, make them uniquely beautiful. Because, I think we know it's one of those things where we look in the mirror every day, the people around us, they see pretty much the same face, but we know where the blemishes are. We're very familiar with kind of the blind spots of our lives. And so that's why this is going to maybe sometimes feel a little bit more like that, okay? Every time I do this, I have to give a whole bunch of caveats and disclaimers, so we'll just get through all of these. Again, not a personality quiz, so the goal here isn't about finding ways to caricature people, to be like, oh, you're such a 2, or you're such a 8, that is not what this is about. Number 2, this is absolutely not the whole story about a person. In fact, the Enneagram is not in the Bible. There are no Bible verses about the Enneagram, so this is not the end-all, be-all of Christian spirituality. I think sometimes people make it that and make it more than it is. It's just a tool, one of many tools. And so for me, any tool, the reason why I think I love personality assessments so much is that any tool that helps me connect more deeply with myself and the people around me that God has entrusted to my care, I'm all for it, and so I want us to use it in that way, nothing more than that. Also want a disclaimer, there are a lot of schools of thought, so even kind of there are schools of thought that differ on how the wings work, that differ on whether or not you were born with your Enneagram type or whether it's more nurture. Just so you know, it's wide ranging. And so, if you've done any work in this, you might find that, that's not what I was taught. Just know that it's very diverse there. Next one is really important. We are not our type. We use our type to navigate pain. So I like the language Chichi uses of armor, that it's not that you are a type 2. Type 2s use a very specific kind of armor to navigate the world around them, to find safety, belonging, acceptance. And so I think that's really important, because the goal of the Enneagram is really to create space between that armor and who you actually are. And the armor is not inherently bad. We've used it. It's helped us survive. It's helped us to actually, it is in many ways a gift given to us, but I think that part is important, okay? And then lastly, obviously this is gonna be very, very introductory, not exhaustive in any way. Once you can go down a deep rabbit hole when it comes to the Enneagram, you can get to like stances, and you can go into like self-preservation types and social types. We're not going to get into all the subtypes and stances and things like that. We're going to keep it a little bit more introductory today. Okay? All right. Next slide. 3 resources that I think were really helpful for me. Obviously, The Road Back to You. If you want a very easy read, at the end of every chapter, they're going to give you what it feels like to be a 1, what it feels like to be a 5. And it's just like a bullet point list. And if you're just trying to figure out like, what type am I? That's probably your best option. It's a really thin yellow book. She has a follow-up to that, which is all about Enneagram and relationships. It's a little green book, also really good. 2 others that I really liked were The Sacred Enneagram by Christopher Hewerts and The Enneagram for Black Liberation. Because one of the things that I love about the Enneagram for Black Liberation is that so much of the material out there for the Enneagram was actually not written by and for minorities. And I do think that their minorities have experienced a very unique, they have unique experiences just navigating the world. There are certain things that are cultural, that kind of converges with the Enneagram, that they're not sure, is this a cultural identity? Is this actually who I am? And things like that. And so that book is really helpful for that. So this is for further reading if you want. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are kind of drawn from these books. Okay, next. We would say that the gospel, as a pastor, every week, every sermon, I'm really trying to help people answer these 3, what we would call the 3 fundamental questions of humanity. Who am I? What went wrong? And how do I get back home? And you can really, anyone seeking, whether you have any experience with Christianity or Jesus or faith or church, as you talk to them and hear their stories, really, you're going to see those 3 questions. Who am I? Identity. What went wrong? What's going on in the world? What's going on with myself? What's going on in my relationships? And how do I get back home, right? And in some ways, the gospel answers each of these questions. Who am I? Genesis 1 says, you're created in the image of God. You're worthy of love, dignity, and respect, right? What went wrong, right? The Bible has an answer for that. Sin, right? How do I get back home? The right answer is always Jesus, right? We learned that in Sunday school. But how does what the Enneagram is a great tool for is that it helps us contextualize each of those questions. It's like, who am I? Yeah, you're created in the image of God, but how? How are you uniquely wired in the image of God? What went wrong? We know the answer to that is sin. We know that sin disorders all of our desires and relationships, but there are different ways that you and I get lost, right? Some people struggle in different ways. We struggle to relate with God, ourselves, and others in different ways, right? The Enneagram is a tool for that. And then how do I get back home? Some people like to use the language of the Enneagram offers us 9 ways that we get lost and 9 ways where we can find home and come back to Jesus, right? So, a perfect way that I would illustrate this is, like, I'm someone, if you took me and my wife, I'm someone that's very driven by approval, right? And so for me, the times that I feel most vulnerable, the times where I feel like I start to spiral is when it feels like Either, the people around me don't like me, don't approve of me, when I feel like I've done a bad job and people are disappointed in me. And so for me, like specifically the slice of the gospel is so rich, but the slice of the gospel that really ministers to me is being reminded, hey, Jesus died for you when you were at your worst. Before, anyone liked you, before you were a good pastor or husband or father, Jesus loved you, Jesus accepts you, Jesus validates you. That really ministers to me. For my wife, who's a little bit more control driven, she's like, okay, that's great. Jesus accepts me as I am, but how are we gonna figure out like this job thing that I'm in, right? My world is spiraling out of control. And for her, the slice of the gospel that really ministers to her is actually not the slice that ministers to me, but it's that, hey, I have a God who is in control of the whole world, who holds everything in his hands, and that not a hair can fall from my head without him knowing. And that really ministers to her. So same gospel ministering to us in two different ways, partly because of the ways that we're wired. Okay? And I'll go through each one of these questions. We'll go to the next slide. So who am I? Right? The Enneagram is, John Calvin used to say, to know God is to know thyself is to know God, right? Jesus says the great commandment is to love God and love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love neighbor as ourself. Well, how do we love neighbor as ourself if we don't know ourself or if we don't love ourself, right? So the Enneagram is really helpful for that. Doctrine isn't enough. So the church talks a lot about God. So you have a whole bunch of people with a lot of knowledge about God with very little self-awareness. This is where emotionally healthy discipleship is huge, right? It's kind of the same idea, right? You can't grow in spiritual maturity while being emotionally immature. And so, the Enneagram is really helpful, especially in spaces where you have a lot of people who know theology, who know doctrine, but are completely disconnected from themselves and others, okay? Real quick, let's stay here. Naming our beauty. I pastor a largely Asian American church, and one of the things that I see in myself and in the people that I pastor is anytime you compliment them or try to affirm them, they're like, no. To celebrate someone is to like put unnecessary attention on them, and we're really bad at naming our beauty, right? Really good at talking about our flaws, really bad at naming our beauty, right? And then finally, recovering our true self. So it's woven into the biblical story as well. There was this self that was fully loved, fully known, in perfect communion with God, before kind of the pains of life, the brokenness of life touched it. And we got to get back to that self, right? That is the Christian story. And so, quote by Augustine, how can you draw close to God when you are far from your own self? So, helpful quote there. Okay, next. What went wrong? Okay. What the Enneagram attests to, and I think we all can probably agree with, is that as kids, we kind of instinctually placed a mask over certain parts of our authentic self to protect us from harm, to help us navigate the world, to survive, right? For some of us, we did it to please our parents, to fit in, to satisfy the expectations of our culture, society, to have our basic needs met. And over time, those adaptive strategies became so complex that we didn't know where like our real self ended and our false self began, right? The kind of personality merged into us. And so kind of the reality of living in a broken world outside of Eden is that we buy into the lie that who we are is not enough, right? And so we begin to react to people and circumstances in very specific ways. We make decisions out of the false notions that we are either what we have, what we do, what we've achieved, how people view us, right? And so all of these are the effects of sin in the world. And I think the Enneagram gives us language for a lot of these things. So again, gives us 9 different ways we get lost. Before we can become who we really are, we must become conscious that the person we think we are here and now is at best an imposter and a stranger, right? Thomas Merton quote there. And how do we get back home? obviously at the root of every decision we make is a desire to find our way back home, to God, our true self. And part of that is unlearning destructive patterns, relearning a new way of being. And the Enneagram is a really helpful tool to do that. Naming, not erasing, right? So I think sometimes, especially when you start to see the shadow side of your type, there is this big temptation to say, like, I want to erase I don't want this at all. But more than trying to erase it, it's more naming it so that we can create space between who we are and the armor we carry. So naming it so that we can embrace the gifts of our type, but also be very aware of the blind spots. Third, seeing clearly and then loving freely. So as we see ourselves more clearly, we learn to disidentify from the parts of our personality that limit us, that keep us from loving others the way Christ loves us, that keeps us from showing up in different spaces the way I know that deep down we all would want to, okay? And then finally, becoming a home for others. So the more we do our own work of returning home, the more we can be home for others, right? And that's a biblical pattern, right? We can't really love others well until we first receive love, until we first learn to love ourselves well, okay? All right. This, if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, this is going to look wild. And you're like, what is this, right? And I will explain. So some important terms that I'm going to just throw around just so you know. You might want to take a picture of it because I don't think I have another picture of this. But basically, the types are the numbers. How you identify your number is by your primary motivation, okay, not behavior. The wings are the numbers that are on the left and right of it. Okay, so like if you're a type 9, your wings are going to be 8 and 1. This is where the different schools of thought come into play. Some people, there are some schools of thought that teach you have one wing like your whole life. So if you're a 9-wing 1 and that is your type, you know. There are other schools of thought that feel like you can exhibit characteristics from both wings. So you can, you know, and then there is like in Suzanne, Richard Rohr, they would say, a lot of times there's one part of our life where like one wing is extra flappy. And then at some point, like the other wing kind of comes into play. And so you kind of switch. And so different schools of thought there, but really the wings are there to say your primary motivation is still your type, but at times you do borrow some of the characteristics and behaviors of the numbers next to you, okay? The security stress types. So you'll see arrows pointing at different numbers. So if you see, like let's go from the 9, you'll see a yellow tipped arrow going to the 3. That means that in security, you're borrowing some of the behaviors of a type 3. And then in stress, you're borrowing some of the negative behaviors of a type 6. Okay, and this is where for some people who have a hard time identifying what type they are, knowing where you go in security and stress has been really helpful for them because that actually has helped confirm what type they are. Okay, and so let me tell you how these security stress types works. Some, like the Enneagram Institute, uses the language of pathways of integration and disintegration. But basically, again, when I say you go to 3, like a 9 goes to 3 in security, it's not that you become a 3. It's not that you take on the 3's motivation. It's that you start to take on some of the positive behaviors and characteristics of that type. And also on the flip side of that, doing some of the 3 types of behaviors is also a pathway out of unhealth for a 9 as well. Okay, so it kind of works in both ways. You start to exhibit certain characteristics of a 3, but you also can borrow 3 behaviors in order to come out of disintegration. So a perfect example of this would be so let's say, let me use a 2 as an example, okay? And for a lot of people, when they are in their stress number, the general sentiment is, oh my gosh, I have to get out of this right now. And the people around them, they want to get them out of their stress number. And on some level, that may be true, but both your security and stress numbers are there to actually be a gift to you. So you can almost see your stress number as the warning light on in your car when your gas is about to run out. It's actually there to alert you to, hey, maybe you're not in the best place, but for a lot of people, they need to be in that stress number because like it's actually a part of their growth. And let me explain this to you. A 2, if you know type 2s, and we'll get to this later, they are the most sacrificial, giving people out there, right? They're always taking care of other people around them. If you notice, they go to type 8 in stress, right? And so if you see a 2 start to go scorched earth on everyone, right? And they are like, this is about, it's my way or the highway, and they start kind of like exhibiting these behaviors that are so foreign to you in terms of knowing a 2. Our first instinct usually, especially if you're in relationship with a 2, is to be like, what is wrong with you? Like, you got to get out of this. But you have to know that for a person who spends their entire life for other people, sometimes they need seasons when they're like, nobody but me, like just me, and you almost sometimes have to gently let them be there a little bit because that's actually really helpful. Now, if you know, 2s go to the good side of 4 in their security. And part of that is like when they are doing, like, we'll learn about 4s later that are artists, they're creative, they do things really for them. They're very individualist, do things for themselves. So it's not for other people. A lot of the 2s I know, they took up like certain hobbies that was for nobody but themselves. So one of my best friends is a 2, and he took up ceramics, right? And he just goes and does ceramics, and that's actually a part of him coming out. Like when he finds himself in that place, like he's like in 8 mode, he'll go reserve some time at the ceramic studio, and he's just working with his hands, doing something creative, not serving anyone else, and it's actually a pathway out of that. And it's funny, like how the Enneagram works so well is, as a 9, I go to performer, achiever, in my secure, that's where I go in security. Doing 3 types of behaviors actually also gets me really excited and happy. So my wife has discovered now that the best time for her to ask me for anything is right after I preach on Sunday, right? Because she knows like he's kind of has operated in this 3 mode and he's feeling good. So she's like, by the way, I'll be going on a vacation with my friends like 2 weeks later. Is that cool, right? But let's say you are a 6 and you go to 3 in stress. That's your stress number. Like if you're married to a 6 and they have to give these presentations and they're done with it and they're tired, that would probably be the worst time for you to ask them for anything, right? And so this is where the Enneagram becomes really powerful, not as a manipulation tool, but just to know, self-awareness, okay? You'll see centers of intelligence, and we're not going to get too deep into this. You'll see like the body, head, heart. Some people use the 891, they call it the gut. There's like heart is more feeling and head is more thinking. And then you have the triads. You have anger, 891, which is your anger triad. 5, 6, 7 is your fear triad. 2, 3, 4. The only one that people disagree on and they don't like the language of is the shame triad. And people have tried to change that one, partly because that word shame carries so much additional baggage than some of the other ones. But just know, the triads, it doesn't mean that the other numbers don't get angry. It's that how you understand your type, a lot of it is specifically connected to how you respond to that emotion. So like, we'll get to that a little bit later, but like how 5, 6s, and 7s relate to their fear is so that describes their type very well. Okay, so all the numbers in some ways can experience fear. Okay, and then the childhood wound, which again is something that we're not going to really have too much time to get into, but this is big in the Enneagram. And I think the best way to frame like childhood wound is it's the way that each of the numbers, each of the types absorb the burden of our caregivers transferring their shadow onto us. Okay, so it's like every number gets associated with a childhood wound. And it's not that like we're all like our parents wounded us. It's that there are certain things that when our parents do it or when we've experienced it, that are amplified in our mind because of the type that we are, right? And so they have the power to either wound us more or heal us. So the same thing that might not really leave a deep scar on one person might leave that scar on another person, okay? All right, tour of the 9 types. I'm gonna go 1 through 9, so I don't have to start with 8 because we're doing all numbers today, okay? You're probably not the number that describes your behavior best. Remember that. You're the number that best describes your inner motivation and the story kind of you've been telling yourself living out of. Again, some of this is going to feel a little bit caricature-y, but just know that it's more for time than anything else. Okay, let's start with the type 1. Okay, called the reformer or the perfectionist. This one is found in the gut triad or the anger triad, okay? So the armor of the one, what the one has used to protect themselves is goodness, okay? The core desire is to be good, right, have integrity. The core fear is being wrong, being corrupt or defective. And then the core need is to be perfect, okay? And, people ask me, like, which number is if you would say is the hardest to be? And they're all hard in their own ways. But I always say, when your core need is to be perfect, that is a pretty hard number to be, okay? I'm just gonna go through, like, quick bullet points to see if it resonates with you, okay? And then we'll talk about the gifts and the blind spots. So if there was a quote to describe a 1, it would be, I feel responsible for making things better, okay? And some bullet points would be, I notice what's wrong before I notice what's right. I have a strong inner critic that's never quite satisfied. I want to do the right thing and be a good person. I often feel frustrated that others don't care as much as I do. It's hard for me to relax because there's always more to improve, okay? The telltale sign, if you're like, the telltale sign of the type 1 is the inner critic, okay? That there's a constant voice in your mind that's telling you, why'd you do it like that? That's wrong. Don't do it like that, right? And it's really an exhaust. How I tell people what that inner critic sounds like. Imagine like, you doing some kind of presentation for work, and you walk away and you're like, oh my gosh, I really bombed that. Like, that was pretty bad. For an average person, those kinds of moments might come every week, depending on the type of job you have, maybe once a month. For the Enneagram type 1, that voice never stops, okay? That is just constantly, you have one conversation, you walk away, it's like, why did I say it like that? Why did I do that, right? And because their core desire is to be good, to be good is such an abstract concept. The way that Enneagram 1s try to be good is that they need to be right. So that is like, it's the easiest way to like, as long as I'm right, I'm following the rules, that's great. So a perfect example of this, I love our staff, and they know I use all of them in examples for Enneagram. We have a type 1 on our staff, and there was a period of time when we had like our staff submit timesheets. We don't do it anymore, but we had them submit timesheets, and then you could tell everyone's Enneagram type by the ways that they submitted their timesheets. And this, the type 1 on our staff, her timesheets would be like, sent email, 12 minutes. And it would be like, and she would say, and she would tell me, sometimes it would be 11:59, and she would actually not write the email until it hit noon so that she could have a precise measure of like exactly how much time she was spending, right? Then we have an Enneagram 7 on our staff, and they have like 4 broad categories, and it's all approximately 4 hours, 3 hours here, 2 hours here, right? So an Enneagram 1, it's like a constant, it's like I have to do it the right way because I want to be good, and it needs to be perfect, okay? The gifts and strengths of Enneagram 1s, they're very principled, again, deeply ethical, right? Self-disciplined, dependable. A lot of Enneagram 1s get caricatured as being very organized, and they're really on it, very rarely late. They make everything they touch better because they're always thinking about how to improve something, right? And Enneagram 1s, I think, sometimes get a bad reputation of being really critical with other people. But just know, if you're in relationship with an Enneagram 1, there is nothing that they will criticize you for that they haven't done worse to themselves. Okay, so for them, they really do see criticism as care, because they're doing that to themselves all the time. And so, an Enneagram 1 would be someone that would come in, like let's say you're married to an Enneagram 1, you've cleaned the entire house, you've done the best you could do, you vacuumed everything, gotten everything. They'll come in and they'll be like, was that pillow right there when I left? Again, it's not because they don't appreciate everything else. Their mind just knows how to find the flaws, okay? So the blind spots, obviously, is that the inner critic runs the show. Can be very rigid, black and white thinking, because if you're always trying to be right, sometimes it's hard for you to live in the gray. And then resentment when others miss the standard, okay? You put yourself at such a high standard that when others miss that standard, it can be very hard for a 1, okay? Just as a show of hands, how many resonate with that right off the bat? Okay, yes. All right, good. No shame here. All right, great. All right, let's go to the next one. The helper, okay? Also known as the giver. This one is in the heart triad, the shame triad. So your armor, the ways that you've survived in the world, is your helpfulness. Core desire is to feel loved. Core fear is being unwanted or unworthy of love. And core need is to be needed, right? And let me know if this resonates with you. So the quote that goes with the Enneagram 2 is, I feel valuable when I'm needed. I naturally notice other people's needs before they ask. I love caring for people, but I often ignore my own needs. Resting feels indulgent when someone nearby might need me. I secretly hope people will appreciate or reciprocate my love. Asking for help feels uncomfortable, okay? Again, not as a manipulation tool, but just so you know, a drug for the Enneagram Type 2 is, I need your help, okay? They might have a million things on their plate, and they might go into a meeting saying, I don't care if anyone asks me for anything, I'm not doing it. And one person says I really need someone to help me with this. They can't stop their hand from going up, okay? That is the Enneagram 2. Obviously, the gifts and strengths is warm, generous, very relationally attuned, because the moment you walk into a room, they'll be the first to be like, did you eat? You look hungry, are you okay? They're constantly making a home for the people around them. They know how to anticipate others' needs, and a lot of times they are the relational glue of a community. People joke around that I clearly love 2s because half of our staff are Enneagram Type 2s, and they're like, you knew that those are the types of people you want around, right, in ministry. Blind spots is when they start to give to earn love, not from freedom. And sometimes what that looks like is that, you really believe that if you're not giving and meeting someone else's needs, that you're going to be loveless. That is a kind of a core issue. And then resentment when the giving goes unnoticed. So a 2, at their best is giving without strings attached. And when they feel like that giving is not appreciated or reciprocated, a lot of the 2s that I speak to, they don't even tell me it needs to necessarily be reciprocated in the same way, because I think 2s instinctively understand you're probably not going to be able to outgive me. But what they do say is what really annoys them is when people that they've given a lot to complain, or they really don't appreciate all that they're doing, right? And then struggles to name their own needs. If you want to see someone stumped, ask a 2 what they need, okay? Because they'll be like, well, what do you need? So it's, yeah, okay? And this one is a really interesting one. When we teach this course at our church, and this is, again, pastoring a predominantly Asian American church. At the beginning of this course, I ask folks to raise their hand if they think they know what their number. And it's pretty wild because like 75% of the room thinks they're a 2. And especially Asian American women. And by the end of the course, we have people raise their hands again, and almost a lot of them have changed their type. And you realize how much of our cultural upbringing, where like at least in the Korean immigrant church, 2s, especially 2 women, were kind of seen as the pinnacle of the type of, you have to be behind the scenes, doing, cooking every week, serving, doing things, and people just internalize that was the way that a person is supposed to be. And so you do see how much kind of cultural baggage there is with some of these things as well, okay? That's the helper. Let's go on to the next one. The achiever, performer, okay? I always say that LA is a type 3's playground. I'm assuming New York has a little bit of this as well. Your armor is success. Core desire is to feel valuable and admired. Core fear is being worthless or a failure. Core need is to succeed. Okay, so here are some of the descriptors. I feel valuable when I succeed. I naturally measure life by goals and accomplishments. I can read a room and become whatever it needs. Slowing down feels like falling behind. Failure feels deeply personal. And I wonder if people would love me if I weren't successful. Okay, so type 3's, achievers, a lot of times they are folks that are constantly accomplishing. Usually their resumes are stacked. And if they're not stacked, they feel really bad about themselves, okay? People generally love being around 3's because they're natural leaders. They kind of have a presence, they're charismatic, they get along with a lot of different kinds of people, they're kind of chameleons, they're able to, function well in different groups. And so, if you have a 3 on your team, you're talking about someone who is a natural leader, high performing, high achieving. The gifts and strengths, again, very driven, adaptable, efficient. They have the power to inspire others toward a goal. They can turn vision into results. If you get deeper into the Enneagram, you'll learn like 3s, 7s, and 8s are very like forward thinking, in front, kind of leadership, typically leadership type of numbers. So 3 is just that 3s, because they do care about image and how they're perceived by others, they tend to be softer than, say, someone like a type 8, but they have that same ability to like accomplish at a very high level. Blind spots is, again, manages image over authenticity. So because you care so much about how you're viewed, a lot of times you don't even know what your real self looks like. Workaholism, restlessness, okay, you're constantly doing, and then loses touch with their own true feelings. So sometimes, even though a number is in like the feelings center, the heart center, they can actually be not in touch with their feelings at all. And 3s are kind of like that. You'll see 2s are very in touch with other people's feelings. 4s are really in touch with their own feelings. 3s, they don't really know kind of how they feel, and they sometimes see feelings as being inefficient, and so they'll kind of put their feelings aside because that's not going to help me do what I need to do to achieve. Okay. Real quick, I didn't even ask on the 2. See, I made the cardinal mistake of not seeing the 2. I'm so sorry. How many of you in the room think you're a 2, a type 2? Okay, we got some hands. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I am sorry. Okay, and then how about type 3? Any type 3s in the room? Okay, yeah, some type 3s. Okay, great. Okay, let's move on. Type 4, the individualist, also known as the romantic or the artist. Okay, also in the heart triad, it's the shame triad. The armor is exceptionality, right? Core desire is to find identity and significance. Core fear is having no significance or being ordinary. And core need is to be special, okay? I would say of all the numbers, the 4 is probably the most complex. There are multiple layers to the 4. If you are in relationship with a 4, if you peel the first layer, that they're like 17 more layers you have to go to get to their true self. Here are some quotes that describe the 4. I long to be deeply known. I often feel different from everyone else. I experience emotions intensely. Ordinary days feel unbearably flat. I long for authenticity and beauty. I'm drawn to what's sad, beautiful, or far away. I envy what seems missing in my own life. I want someone to truly understand me, but quietly assume they won't. Okay? We'll get to type 7 later, but like a type 7, if let's say you just broke up with someone, right? A significant other, a type 7 will be like, we're going out tonight, okay? I gotta forget about this. Like we're having fun, forget them. A type 4 breaks up, they lock themselves in their room, turn on the saddest music you can think of, and they just will wallow, okay? Type 4s generally tend to run a little bit melancholy, because again, there's this constant, nobody knows me. Nobody really understands me, right? If a type 3, because again, very image driven, is the person that's on trend. Like you see a type 3 and it's like, oh man, you're so on it. A type 4 sees the trend and will purposely do the opposite of the trend. So, we have a type 4 on our staff. On Easter Sunday, she comes the most underdressed. And like last year she wore a capybara hat, and she wore, because she was that's Easter Sunday, so everyone else is dressed up, so she's gonna buck the trend and do something different, okay? So obviously they're very creative, very emotionally honest. If you get into a conversation with a 4, because there's so many layers to them, they don't mind being vulnerable right off the bat. Their baseline conversation is pretty deep, okay? And sometimes more deep than most people's baseline conversations. They're deeply empathetic toward pain. So the 4s in my life, I cherish them so much because they're the few people who can really be present with me. And sometimes they cry more than I'm crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you really feel what I'm going through, right? And they're able to bring beauty out of hard things. Because again, they live in that valley. They live in the melancholy. So they're used to really excavating beauty out of even the most painful things in life. Blind spots, of course, are melancholy, envy, this constant sense of discontentment, I wish I had what they have, feeling chronically misunderstood, and then self-absorption in their own story. So, when you're a romantic, you can kind of go through life really being like, am I in a movie right now? That is, you kind of walk through life in a kind of dramatic way, okay? Blind spot. All right, raise your hand if you think you might be a type 4. Okay, a couple people here. Yes, okay, great. Got a good mix. Let's go to the next one. Yes, the type 5. Okay, the investigator, okay, also known as the observer or the thinker. This one is, now we're entering the head triad, so the fear triad. And it's, again, with the triads, it's how each of these numbers relate to fear, okay? So for the investigator, the way they manage their fear is by garnering as much knowledge as they possibly can. So their armor is knowledge. Core desire is to be capable and competent. Core fear is being helpless, useless, or overwhelmed. And the core need is to perceive and understand. Okay, so if you're a type 5, here are some quotes. I need enough space to think. I feel safest when I'm prepared. I have a limited store of energy and I guard it closely. I prefer understanding before acting. Too much demand from people feels overwhelming. Small talk drains me. When the world feels like too much, I retreat into my head. And privacy feels like oxygen. Okay? Type 5s, the way that you know, like type 5, so there are some numbers with an exorbitant amount of energy. So like 8s have the most energy, 9s have like actually the least energy. The 5s have a measured amount of energy. Okay, so at the beginning of the day, they start with a tank of energy. When that tank is depleted, it is gone. They are done. Okay, do not make them do anything else. Let them retreat to their room and have their private time. And the thing with 5s is that there are no such thing as rollover minutes. So if you didn't expend your energy today, it's not that you have suddenly more energy tomorrow. You start with the same amount at the beginning of the day, okay? And then you go through it. 5s, according to Suzanne, they are the only ones in the whole Enneagram who can truly be neutral. Okay? Even 9s, who are the peacemaker and they can see both sides, a lot of times they end up merging, like in order to appease, like they're cognizant of like what is the side that I need to be on for the most harmony here. She says 5s are the ones that can truly be neutral. So if you have an issue and you need mediation, a 5 would be a great person to talk to as long as the conversation doesn't go over like 3 hours, okay? So just respect their time, be on time. They say that a 5's, one of their worst nightmares, because privacy is something they value, it is like oxygen. Suzanne always says one of the worst nightmares for a 5 is like if they got into some kind of accident and they were in a coma and they woke up from the coma and they saw every person in all different seasons of their life all gathered around the bed. That would be like a worst nightmare experience because they would be like, what have you told this person? And what has my family member told you about me? And, because again, they're very private. So 5s they are constantly observing, but a lot of times they don't have to be at the center of the conversation. Sometimes you won't even know they're there, right? Every number has an animal associated with it, and 5s are the owl. Okay, so like they're like eyes are big and they're there. They don't need to but very resourceful. They're the people who aren't going to give you the warm and fuzzies. So it's funny, like on our staff, we have 2 staff members. One's a 2 married to a 5. They're both 2s married to 5s, right? And the 2 is always like warm and fuzzy. And the 5, the way they show love is by like making sure they have water in the car. It's like, it's not like I love you so much, like what can I do to serve you? But they will still love you in the ways that 5s can. Okay, so if you meet a 5, know that if you saw their YouTube search, like it would be the most random things. Partly because again, if their armor is knowledge, they know so much about random things because part of like the way that they've navigated the world and the way that they feel safe is by amassing as much knowledge as they can. Okay. All right, the loyalist, okay? Also in the head triad, fear triad, also known as the questioner. Some people call them the devil's advocate, okay? The armor is vigilance. Core desire is to have security and support. Core fear is being without guidance or support. And core need is to be sure or certain, okay? So a few quotes here. For the 6, I want to know I'm safe. I picture the worst case scenario before I picture anything else. I prepare for problems before they happen. Loyalty matters deeply to me. I wrestle with doubt even about things I care about. I second guess decisions even after they're made. I breathe easier when I know who's actually in charge. Okay, so type 6s, because they are they want to be sure and certain, they do attach onto authority figures that they can trust. Once they find them, like what they say is basically law. As long as they can trust you, they will be loyal to you, and they will take everything you say like very, very seriously. Okay. For the type 6, why they're called the devil's advocate sometimes is because the telltale sign of a type 6 is that your mind automatically goes to worst case scenario thinking. So that's why sometimes you give them a plan and they'll try to poke holes in it because they're already thinking worst case scenario. And so that's the way that they manage their fear, by thinking about every possible thing that could happen. So one of the things that gets talked about a lot with type 6s is they can sometimes feel like negative Nancy's, like a little bit difficult when you're in there with because they're like always thinking about things that probably won't happen. But when you're in crisis, having a 6 around is the best because there's nothing that they haven't already thought of, okay? So they're like, oh yeah, then now we're good. So these are people that you want when the crisis is happening. They can be harder when you're just ideating, okay? Gifts and strengths: loyal, they're very prepared, responsible. One of my family members is a strong 6, and so she, to this day, takes a Swiffer to every hotel she stays at, okay? It doesn't matter how nice the hotel is. She takes a Swiffer there, okay? Sees what could go wrong before it does. And courageous once committed, okay? Blind spots are anxiety, worst case scenario thinking, obviously. Self-doubt, masked as certainty. And suspicion of others' motives, right? So until they can trust you, they're always going to be suspicious of you, right? But once they really trust you as a leader or authority figure, then they're going to put all their loyalty behind you. This one, I will give one caveat to the 6 is when you go deeper into the Enneagram, you'll for the 6, there's basically something called a phobic 6 and a counterphobic 6. And I do want to mention that because some people mistype themselves. This is one that gets mistyped a lot as an 8. So some of the 6s in your life, or if you, sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm an 8 or 6. 6 has a phobic type, which is basically what a person would normally associate with a 6. So what that means is a phobic 6 you're about to take them, you're like, hey, let's go skydiving. They're thinking worst case scenario. They're like, I'm not going skydiving. I know what can happen with skydiving. I've seen all the videos about, I know everything. I'm not going. A counterphobic 6 actually has that same fear, but a counterphobic 6 is like I have to conquer this fear, So you know what? Let's go skydiving, okay? They're still afraid inside, but it's like self-doubt masked as certainty because they really feel like, no, I have to conquer this fear. But sometimes that confidence comes off like an 8 because the devil's advocate part of it does feel very challengery and things like that. And so people mistype that number a lot. And this is where you have to ask yourself, is the core emotion that you resonate with more fear or anger, which you'll find later on, okay? So, all right, any folks who think they might be a type 6 in the room? Okay. Yeah, okay, great.
You gotta ask about 5 too. I don't think.
Oh, I didn't ask about 5. Any type 5s in the room? Oh, yeah, good number. Okay, type 5s. Okay, great. Okay. All right, anyone still not sure? You feel like you might have heard your number, but you're not sure. Okay, yes, okay, great. All right, let's go to the type 7. Okay, yes, a very type 7S response there, okay? Yeah, my wife is a type 7, so love type 7. So the enthusiast, 7s are the life of the party. They are the life of every party. And so armor is optimism. So the way 7s manage their fear is by basically filling their life with as many great new things as possible, okay? Core desire is to be satisfied, happy, and free. Core fear is being trapped in pain or deprivation, and core need is to avoid pain, okay? So you are a 7 if you have thought these thoughts. I don't want to miss out on life. I love possibilities and new experiences. I'll find a way around pain rather than sit in it. My mind is on the next thing before this one is over. I keep moving because slowing down feels uncomfortable. I fear missing out on something better. Routine and commitment can start to feel like a cage. Okay? So again, the way that enthusiasts manage their fear is more adventure, okay? By putting more things. Classic 7 trait is their ability to immediately reframe a negative as a positive. So if you are talking about, I guarantee you, you can try to, if you ask a 7, like something about like hard about their childhood, like they will say like sometimes the wildest things ever, like, and then they'll like make a joke about it or laugh about it. Okay, like, and that is a way that they try to avoid pain. Okay, so like they're trying to be satisfied and happy, you know, and so anything that feels too dark or too painful or too sad, they're going to avoid it. They're going to try to avoid it, right? And so again, part of the work of the Enneagram is that not like a 7 then should never talk about sad things. It's like, how do you get a 7 to a place where they're able then to talk about some of the harder things in their life, okay? They say that 7s generally love planning and thinking about a vacation than actually being on the vacation, because when they're on the vacation, they're already thinking about the next vacation, okay? My wife has started so many different ventures, you know, like, and you know, she gets really excited and really into it, and then somewhere in the middle, she's like, I don't want to do this anymore, okay? Classic 7 thinking, okay? Gifts and strength, obviously, very quick thinkers, joyful, optimistic, sees possibilities everywhere, brings a lot of energy into a room. Again, yeah, life of every party. Blind spots can be, again, avoids pain and difficult emotions, scattered, unfinished commitments, and then escapism dressed up as spontaneity, right? So a lot of times they're just trying to escape, but it can be framed as like, oh no, we're just trying to be spontaneous, right? Now, just so you can see how this kind of plays out really in marriage is, you know, once we did a lot of Enneagram work, and I realized that my wife's core desire was to be free, and her core fear was being trapped. Like, I realized one of the things that recurring kind of conflicts we were having in marriage was early on in my ministry as a lead pastor, I would say things like, hey, we should have this couple over for dinner. And I would add, and she would be like, do we have to like, she's like, it's kind of been a crazy time. And I would say something like, well, I feel like given that, you know, I'm the pastor here, and, you know, I feel like that's something we should probably do for these newcomers. And anytime I use that language of like, we should do it, she would shut down completely, right? And it was only after doing the work in the Enneagram of like, oh shoot, like that is her core. I'm like really attacking her core fear of being trapped. And so now, again, not a manipulation tactic, but like when things are coming up, I will often say like, hey, I know you're super busy. Like, if you want me to meet up with these folks on my own, I totally will. And then you just let me know which of these things you want to join. Ironically, more often than not, my wife will actually join because she feels like she has the agency to make that decision and she feels free. Like I have now given her a choice rather than trapped her. So those small things really have helped us so much and helped me really understand kind of what my wife needs and how to love my wife well. And so this is where the Enneagram can really be a super powerful tool, okay? Any 7s in the room? Or people who, yes, yeah? Yeah, great. Let's go to the type 8, okay? The challenger, okay? The animal associated with the type 8 is the lion, okay? So that should tell you. Real quick, the 1 is the worker bee, okay? Or the ant sometimes. 2 is the kangaroo, right? You always have a Joey inside, right? 3 is the eagle, okay? 4 is a butterfly, okay? 5 is the owl. 6 is a rabbit. 7 is a monkey. 8 is a lion, and then 9 is a turtle, okay? Okay. Armor here, now we're in the anger triad. Armor here is strength. Core desire is to protect self and others. Core fear is being controlled, harmed, or made vulnerable. And core need is to be against. And that, I know that sounds really like harsh, to be against, but part of the challenger thing is like anything that will kind of require vulnerability, you're gonna always put up this armor of like, no. Like I'm gonna stand against you, okay? I refuse to be controlled. I feel most alive when I'm in control of the room. I instinctively protect myself and others. I respect people who are direct and honest. Vulnerability feels risky. I'd rather be angry than powerless. I test people to see if they can handle the truth. And softer feelings get buried under decisive ones, okay? With 8s, their presence is felt, okay? A type 8, when they walk into a room, you know they're in that space. There's a presence, like they're often very charismatic. They don't need to be liked by everyone, And I think one big misconception about type 8s is that they want to control everyone, and that's actually not true. 8s don't want to be controlled, right? So sometimes their forcefulness and strength can come off like, I'm trying to control you. No. They just want to make sure you don't try to control them, okay? They can dominate conversations. 8s, their power can be used for incredible good, okay? Like, especially when it comes to justice, protecting the vulnerable, protecting the marginalized. Like 8s are really, because of like their strength, are really, really good at that, right? So you'll see in the gifts and strengths, confident, decisive, protective, fights for justice for others, bold in the face of conflict. Blind spots can be domineering, confrontational instincts, avoiding tenderness and vulnerability, sometimes intimidation used instead of influence, okay? Because at some point, 8s start to know that they are powerful and that people do respond to them in a certain way. And so if you're not careful, you can use it in that way, okay? With the 8s, one of the things I do want to mention is like underneath all that strength is actually someone really innocent and vulnerable. Like all of these numbers kind of have like a self that you're trying to get back to. And for the 8, it is that, It's hard though if an 8 has been betrayed multiple, like let's say because part of their like, fear is that I can't trust anyone. So a lot of the 8s that they could probably count on one hand the number of people they actually really trust. Because if your whole kind of goal is to protect yourself, you're gonna not give your trust to that many people, okay? Any type 8s in the room? Maybe? Okay, yeah. It's really funny and this is nothing against type 8s. When I do teach this course, like, because I do focus, we go way more in depth with each number, and I do focus a little bit more on what I would consider like the shadow side. All the other numbers, they're really like uncomfortable, because they're like, they feel like, oh man, they're really calling out, like confronting all these worst sides. And at the end of the thing, I always apologize. I'm sorry. I know some of you may feel uncomfortable. It's always the 8s who are like, but you didn't name any flaws for me, like you're like, those were all great things, yeah, it's funny. Finally, the 9, okay, type 9. This is what I am here. It's also in the gut triad, also known as the mediator or the peacemaker, the anger triad. And see, another example of, I would say, if you know a type 9 in your life, you would normally not connect them to anger. Like you would be like, oh, they don't seem like an angry person. Why are they in the anger triad? But again, it's how you relate with that emotion. So if 8s externalize their anger, Ones internalize their anger, it becomes resentment. Nines forget they're angry, and it comes out sideways in different in passive aggressive ways. Okay, armor is adaptability, so you're constantly adapting to your surroundings because the core desire is to maintain inner peace and outer peace. You want your life to be as peaceful as possible. Okay, core fear is conflict and loss of connection. Core need is to avoid. Okay? Nines often will say, I want everyone to be okay. I naturally see every side of an issue. Harmony matters more than winning. I avoid conflict because it feels costly. I lose track of what I want while keeping everyone else comfortable. I often say, whatever you want is fine, even when it isn't. I merge with other people's plans without quite noticing. And then my anger shows up late and sideways. Okay? Now, nines, a big characteristic of nines is our merging capabilities. And what merging means is like you literally merge with the other person in order to appease them and to create harmony. So if you were to ask our church people, it's really funny. I think half of our church thinks I'm Democrat, and I think the other half thinks I'm Republican. Okay, and like they would swear that if on every controversial issue that I meet with them about, they walk away. I think, and it's not that I lie to them, but I think they walk away believing that I'm on their side somehow. And part of that creates this. Sometimes we kind of don't assert ourselves. We kind of fall into the background because that's the easiest way to create harmony. Okay, that was a really quick on-the-surface tour. Just one, we'll go to the next slide. Just one kind of final maybe reflection that we can do. Again, just turn to the person on your left or right. Again, which type did you find yourself leaning toward? What was the thing that made you come to that conclusion? So, it's like, oh, like I see this recurring theme in my life, and then number two, what's one gift and one blind spot you want to keep exploring after today?